Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk a little bit about the employee experience and how that relates to what I would consider a broader definition of culture that we use. That's actually much more important, we would say. So in the world of HR technology, which is this odd little world I've somehow found myself in, you would think that the employee experience is really king. So whenever you talk about culture in the HR technology world, you're really mainly talking about the employee experience. I remember I was at the that Las Vegas conference last year, and I was walking around, and this guy said, "Hey, do you want to see a great culture solution?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got a pretty good culture solution myself." And I asked him what it was, and he says, the way we improve culture is we built a platform where employees can give uh, Dunkin' Donuts gift cards to one another. And I said, okay, well, I mean, I guess I would like a Donuts gift card. Maybe that is doing some good, but it's just very, very different than how we've spent the past 10 years thinking about culture and researching culture, and it's very different than how we think that culture actually matters and affects organizations. So today, we'll talk a little bit about that. And one of the things that I think is really interesting between this, this HR technology world is how removed it often is from the CEO's office and from what organizations at the very top tend to prioritize. Because one of the big takeaways that I've had over the past 10 years is that much less than you think, organizations do not really prioritize the employee experience, and much less than if you're walking around that HR technology um, conference, you would think. So it's kind of interesting actually. What makes the employee experience go up and down? Okay, so is it progress over time? Are we entering this new period in the future of work where everyone is just prioritizing the employee experience? Is it these CEOs who really care about their employees are going out of their way to kind of prioritize things for them, or is something else going on? And I would say probably something else is going on, based at least on my experiences in this industry and also some of the data that I'll show you. So, what makes the employee experience go up and down? Well, I think this chart is a pretty interesting place to start. And I realize I'm about to show you this chart. It's capturing this huge economic phenomenon and with two variables, and I'm sure it has omitted variables. And we're not publishing this in the Journal of Financial Economics. This is for a YouTube video, but nevertheless. I think this is a pretty interesting chart, and I think you might too. And it actually meshes perfectly with what I've encountered and what just economic theory 101 would predict. So I'll show you the chart. So what's going on in this chart is that the horizontal axis is the U.S. labor force participation rate. So what percentage of the American population is currently employed or else looking for work? And the y-axis, the vertical axis, is showing the average Glassdoor rating in the United States across all different industries. Just the average American employee is saying, "This is how much I like working at my company right now." And this is a very good metric for employee satisfaction, for the overall quality of the employee experience. And so, what this chart is saying, at least it appears this is the most obvious interpretation, is basically when it's easy to get labor, when the labor force participation rate is relatively high, then employers are saying, okay, we don't, it's easy to get them, we don't have to try too hard. And the overall employee satisfaction rate is relatively low, and vice versa. So when labor is very scarce, as it was during the Great Resignation, or shortly after COVID, then employers are saying, oh, okay, we've actually got to work to get these employees, and we've got to provide a stronger employee experience. And is part of that compensation? Yes, part of that is compensation. However, compensation is a relatively important, but not as important as culture when it comes to driving the Glassdoor rating. Uh, so what this chart suggests, and by the way, we're kind of we're coming back on this curve. We're now there's a greater labor force participation rate, and employers are saying, okay, actually, let's lower the employee experience a little bit. So that's where we are right now. We spent the past 15 years or so bringing the employee experience up, and now at least it appears to be from the past 2 years. Now it's going back down again. Um, so this chart is saying that the employee experience is not due to the goodness of the CEO's heart necessarily. There are some great CEOs out there. I'm not saying there aren't. It's not due to the a new enlightened future of work nirvana. What this chart suggests is that it's primarily due to labor scarcity. This is the cold, brutal truth of economics, and of course, this, as I said, we're not publishing this chart in the Journal of Financial Economics. There could be other things going on right now. But what I think is interesting about this chart is, A, it meshes perfectly with, the most basic economic theory ever created. It's Economics 101. And two, it meshes perfectly as well with my own experience. I work with a lot of CEOs. And what was interesting during the Great Resignation, we were getting a lot of calls saying, hey, we really need to improve this employer experience. We just have to stop people from quitting, and we need to attract new labor. And then about a year ago, when the Great Resignation ended, those calls were much, much less common. There's much less demand for improving the employee experience, and instead you got more demand for things like strategic culture. How do you build a culture that supports strategy execution? So this, for all those reasons, this is, at least for what it's worth, is my personal view about how the employee experience works. So it's just basically based on labor scarcity, and that is the cold, hard truth that I have learned to accept, and it did take me a little while to accept that. Now, of course, there are exceptions. Okay, so there are some companies that genuinely prioritize their employees through hell and high water, even when the Great Resignation is over. Um, the thing is, there aren't that many of them, at least that I can count. So, what if we considered this question: do employers really care about employees, at least in the eyes of the employees themselves? And what if we treated this as an empirical question? Well, these are exactly the kind of cultural questions that we love in our research. Um, so to do this, we can use Glassdoor, which is the best cultural data set in the world for my money. It's so interesting. And whenever I introduce Glassdoor data, I just want to say a quick note on Glassdoor, because there are a lot of folks out there, especially in HR, who have bad experiences with the Glassdoor, and they say this is just somewhere where venters go to air their grievances about their employer. Okay, to that I would say objectively false. So if you actually look at the distribution of Glassdoor reviews, more than 60% of those reviews are 5-star and 4-star reviews, positive reviews, and fewer than 20% of them are 1 and 2-star reviews. And actually, there was a great study done looking at all the different review platforms on the internet, or most of the big ones, and it found that Glassdoor was actually one of the least polarized review platforms of any kind, including Yelp and Google reviews and things like that, on the entire internet. Okay, so Glassdoor is not where people go just to vent. It's actually where they go to express quite balanced and insightful opinions, in my experience. And then, okay, so on Glassdoor, employees will speak about hundreds of different topics, which you can measure if you have a good cultural measurement platform. And one of them is the extent to which their employer cares about them or does not care about them. So hundreds of thousands of employees on Glassdoor will talk about this topic. They'll say either, my company really cares about me, or more often, they'll say, my company does not care about me. It's a pretty binary thing. This one's relatively easy to measure. And what this chart is showing is the largest 1,600 American employers on Glassdoor over the past couple of years. And each of these rows, they're too small to see, but I can hover over them. Each of these rows is a different large employer. And the horizontal axis on this chart is when employees raise this topic. So when they say either that the employer does care about them or does not care about them, what percentage of those comments are employees saying that the employer does care about them? Okay, so what this would mean is that if you're at 100% on this axis, whenever you talk about your employer caring about you or not caring about you, 100% of the time you're saying that they do care. And if you're at 0%, 100% of the time you're saying that they do not care. Um, okay, and a few notes about this chart is pretty interesting. So if you look at this chart, nearly 2/3 of the sample, 64% of the sample, is below 50%, meaning that their employees are more likely to say the company does not care about them than that the company does care about them. Okay, so that's kind of interesting to me. That was news to me when I did this analysis. I was not expecting an outlook that grim. And I would say that even 50% is really not a very good score on this chart. So if there is as many employees saying, yeah, the company cares about me as saying the company does not care about me, that's maybe not necessarily what you should be shooting for. I would say maybe a good score on this chart would be around 70%, where more than twice as many employees say that the company does care as that the company does not care. And when you look at that 70% threshold, this is only 10% of the sample. Okay, so I would say that 90% of the sample is getting a not so good score on this metric, and only 10% of the sample is getting a good score. So that's 160 employers. Um, and then what's more, this is just the overall sentiment. But maybe if you're looking for a really good score here, you want a company where employees are not just saying, "Oh yeah, the company cares about me," but they're going out of their way to say, this company really cares about me. I'm really vocal about this. So if you look at those companies where over 10% of the employees go out of their way to say that the company cares about them, then that really drops the number of employers to only 22 employers out of this sample of about 1,600. What can we learn from this? At least my interpretation is, some companies really do prioritize the employee experience, and I've worked with many of those companies. They're some of our best clients because they really care about improving the culture for their employees. However, I would say if you're looking across the entire American landscape, and we've done similar analyses with global data, they're outliers. They really are outliers. It's 10% tops. It's pretty rare. So what do you make of this? I mean, this is kind of depressing data, or at least I was a little unhappy when I learned about this. But at the end of the day, this is what it is. Okay. You can say this is unjust. You should say that employers should always prioritize their employees regardless of the labor market conditions. And maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. But at the end of the day, in the society we live in, a CEO's job isn't to make things as good as possible for employees. Because if he or she did that, then virtually all the revenue would go to wages, and the toilets would be made of solid gold, and you'd have 50 weeks of vacation a year, and so on and so forth. Society just couldn't work that way. So in our society, a CEO's job is to maximize the economic value for his or her firm, and in many ways, all of our society depends on that. So having worked with a lot of these CEOs, I don't think they're bad people, of course. I don't think they're bad people, and I do think on some level they really do care about their employees. They're really just doing their jobs, and their job is to maximize economic value. So that's what I have to say on the employee experience and where it fits into most companies' priorities. And that's maybe it's a little bit of a depressing narrative, but I think that is what it is. And I think most economists wouldn't be too surprised by that. Um, uh, but Okay, so most companies do not prioritize the employee experience, at least not when labor is easier to get, as it appears to be getting easier right now, actually, in 2024. Um, Does that mean that culture does not matter? That's the question I'm asking, because I think when a lot of the definition of culture has gotten taken over to such a large extent by HR and by the HR technology industry, that whenever anyone thinks about culture right now, even CEOs, what they're very often thinking about is the employee experience. So you can say to this CEO, hey, you've got to prioritize culture right now. It's very important. And the CEO will say, well, actually, no, I really don't, because the labor market is fine right now. And I think that that's a pretty common dynamic. And the main point of this video I would like to make is that that is wrong, because I think we have different definitions of culture. And my point is that culture always matters. Even when the employee experience doesn't matter, culture always matters. Um, and the reason for this is that culture is more than the employee experience. I want to reclaim that definition of culture as best I can, because there's such a wide body of evidence that culture is so much of a richer phenomenon than simply making happy employees happy or sad, engaged, disengaged. Um, so let's just step back a second and really think through what is culture, at least according to our research and a lot of great people's research. So one way to think about culture is the Chapman O'Reilly definition, which is that culture is a set of values and norms that are widely held and strongly held across an organization. So you can see in this image, it's all these employees. No one's telling them to think this way, but there's just something kind of invisible in the air. Something, it's kind of hard to put your mind on it. But for whatever reason, they're all on the same page, even without any implicit instruction from their supervisors to innovate. In this case, this company has a firmly ingrained culture of innovation. And from that definition, you can derive a few more definitions that I personally find a little bit more fun. And this first one, it's a great definition. I got it from this journalist at The Economist. He asked me what was my definition, and then he said his, and his was actually a lot better than mine. So I use his a lot. And it's that culture is how employees make decisions when their boss is out of the room. Okay, so it's what you do. It's these values and norms you subscribe to, and the behaviors you enact, even if no one is telling you, especially when no one is telling you explicitly how to behave. This is just kind of your fallback heuristic. This is what you do when you're not given formal instruction. And you can imagine in an organization, okay, some of your decisions are going to be your boss telling you exactly what to do, but that's a relatively small amount. Most of your decisions, hopefully, at least if you have a culture of autonomy, are going to be you making those decisions yourself. And if your most important heuristic for making these decisions is culture, that means culture can create or destroy a huge amount of value. And this definition is pretty closely related to the third definition we like to use, which came from some research we did on HubSpot. This is how they think about it over there. They've got a really good culture. Culture is a company's operating system. Okay, so this is the same basic idea. Basically, without formal instruction, without any user, just pressing on the keyboard and telling you execute that command, this is how things are working in the background. Incredibly powerful force. And a definition that I came up with on my own, actually, this one is mine, and it's probably the worst one, but maybe it's a little bit evocative. I often think of culture as this huge, almost invisible, or at least it's difficult to measure. God knows that's true. Puppet master who's calling the shots on many of these important organizational outcomes. Okay, so culture is this kind of invisible. It's actually not invisible. You can measure it. It's hard to measure, but it's in the background. It's this huge force, and it's saying, do this, and do this. And even if it's not an executive, it's in some ways more powerful than the CEO. So just to give you an example of what exactly do we mean by culture, going into these concrete norms and behaviors. A thought exercise I like to do is imagine a company. It's a software development company, and you have these two engineers, and one of them has just stumbled on this really interesting new way of doing something. And he's not exactly sure where if it's going to lead to anything, but he knows it's kind of cool and it's kind of interesting. Um, and he shares this with the guy sitting next to him, his colleague, and the colleague says, "Oh yeah, that's a cool way of doing it. Yeah, let's see where that gets you." And again, is the colleague's boss telling him to say this? No, this is just kind of in the air. This is this invisible force. This is this operating system. This is this puppet master that, for whatever reason, this colleague is saying, "Yeah, that's a cool way of doing it. Keep doing it." Um, okay, so that's one company, and then imagine a second company where it's the exact same situation. This employee has stumbled on a cool way of doing something, but in this case, the colleague says, come on, we don't have time for that. We don't have time to waste on that. Let's just get back to work. Let's just do our jobs. Um, okay, and again, no one's telling him to say that. That's just the culture. That's just the culture that's dictating his words, which leads to behaviors. And those behaviors in those two companies, if you can imagine that, there are many conversations like that throughout the course of building this software product, is going to have huge implications. Okay, so in the first company, probably the new software product is going to be a lot more innovative. Maybe it'll be a lot higher quality. Maybe it'll be groundbreaking. Maybe this will get a lot higher market share. Maybe this will lead to more profitability. Maybe this will increase the share price, and so on and so on and so on. Everything that makes a company can come back to a large extent to conversations like these that are being had that are largely cultural conversations. And in the second case, it's different. Maybe the product comes out on time and that leads to better things. That could be better too. But in any case, it's going to result in very different outcomes as a result of culture. Okay, so that's one specific example of culture, and this is the value and the norms and behaviors around innovation. But innovation is just a tiny, tiny sliver of culture. So culture has many, many, many dimensions, as I'll show you on this slide. And I could have 5 or maybe 10 slides like this and still not exhaust all of the dimensions of culture. Which, by the way, any one of these dimensions at any given time could be salient. This could be the dimension that you as an executive want to focus on to improve your culture in the highest impact way. And they're all, as you can see from this chart, incredibly important. So you can just do this little thought exercise. Imagine company A that's good at this and company B that's bad at this. So take, for instance, physical safety. Say you're a manufacturer and you have this remarkable culture of physical safety and no one ever gets hurt and employee well-being is great. And then you have a second company where the culture of physical safety is terrible and there are injuries all the time. It's a dangerous place to work. Just imagine how different those two companies are. Or take, for instance, accountability. Imagine you have this culture of incredibly strong accountability, and everyone knows exactly what they're responsible for, and they take accountability for it, and it makes it a lot easier to execute. Versus a second company where everyone kind of passes the buck, and it's unclear what everyone is supposed to be doing, and it's just a lot harder to get done. Okay, so those are just two examples of the hundreds of examples of cultural dimensions that can really impact everything about a company. From the employee satisfaction, culture is a huge driver of employee satisfaction, far larger than compensation. But from employee satisfaction to share price to market share to anything that matters about a company, it's going to be largely dictated by this invisible puppet master that we call culture. Okay, so that's really the main point here, that even if, in 2024, the employee experience maybe it's less of a big deal than it was 2 years ago, um, even if you don't prioritize that kind of culture, you always want to be prioritizing the kind of culture that I'm talking about, which is the broader definition that extends well beyond just the employee experience, although it also has a huge impact on the employee experience. Um, yeah, because you do not want to associate culture solely with the employee experience. I would say this is a big mistake. And if you do that, you're missing out on maybe the single most powerful lever that you can pull in an organization to affect the outcomes that you want. Um, and in other videos, I'll talk you through why we're at a very exciting time in culture. Right, we're kind of a revolutionary time. For the first time, we can actually properly measure this phenomenon to a much better extent than we could even a couple of years ago, and that means we can properly manage it. And improving it has never been easier. So these are very exciting days for culture. However, the most exciting days for culture are ironically the days where the fewest people care about it because they keep on equating it with the employee experience. So please don't do that. Thank you very much, and I hope you found this interesting.